Hello, everybody. This is Jose Palomino with another great episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. And the reason it's a great episode is our guest today is Daniel Allford of ARC Specialties. Now, Daniel's built this business since the 1980s into a real local and international powerhouse in the world of manufacturing robotics. So Dan's going to share his experience, what's kept his team together through some tough times, and also some words of wisdom for his fellow business owners. So if you're an owner-operator of a business in B2B, you can't miss this episode. Daniel Allford, let's welcome him to our show right now. Well, welcome, Dan, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Dan, why don't you, just for our listeners to get full context, just tell us a little bit about your company and who you serve and what you do for them.
It's a long story. I'll try to make it brief. So way back in 1983, I started building machines in my garage and for industry. So it's just a part-time job for me, but I actually made more than I did during the day. So that inspired me to continue. And I continued for 7 years building machines. And then in 1990, I went full time. And so what we do is we design and build automated manufacturing equipment for industries around the world. We're in 32 different countries. And to me, it's a whole lot of fun because we get to work in a whole lot of different industries. And in the process, we get to learn a little something from each one of them. So we'll learn something from one industry, take it to another, and it makes us look smart. But really, it's just an example of analogous thinking. So most of this nowadays is robots. Early on, I was a computer geek in the 70s and a guy that did manufacturing. You put those two things together and you get a robot guy, at least in the early days.
Okay.
And so that gave me my start. But now I've got a team of guys and gals that are just unbelievable that allow us to build machines for all over the world.
Well, so Dan, one thing that comes to mind right away is just given the highly technical nature of the stuff you do, often when you think about technology and advanced technology, you think about that's the world of really big companies. And here you are kind of in an entrepreneurial mid-market company, as I understand it. How do you compete with, like, I'm sure there's big boys in your space too. How do you compete with them? How do you get up in the morning and say, we're going to do battle with whoever your giant is, and you're winning? So how have you navigated that?
Well, that's an excellent question, and that's something that keeps me up at night, obviously, because bigger companies have more resources and they have more visibility. So to get around that, what we do is we do the stuff they don't want to do. For example, we do a great deal of robotic welding, okay? And the simplest form of welding that lends itself to robotics is called gas metal arc welding or MIG welding, where you have a wire coming out of a torch. And so those are the easy jobs, and that's how most robotic welding, other than spot welding, is done in America. And so we intentionally kind of avoid those jobs. We look for the jobs that have more value added, that are a little more challenging, because there's a lot of other welding processes out there. There's plasma and submerged arc and all these things, which many of my big competitors tend to avoid. So I kind of take the leftovers, but to be candid, the leftovers pay better.
Wow. Well, that's really clever. I mean, you're going where, because they're all about volume, right? Any big company in any big competitive space is going to be going after the volume play. And you're going after the specialty play, the smaller niche play.
And early on, and this is a trick I inadvertently learned early on, is the world needs technology, but doesn't know how to implement it. And so on a local level, when it was just me in my garage, I would go talk to the local guys that were selling computers and welding and such. And then they would introduce me to their customers, to the end users, because they wanted to sell the welding machine or the robot or the servo motor. And the customer wanted that stuff hooked up and running. And I was the glue that stuck the two together. And so that worked fine on a local level. And we're still doing it on a national level now, because if you talk to the big robot companies and you say, hey, I want to do plasma welding, that's a very short list of companies here in America can do it. So I'm getting leads from the big guys by having that specialty. So, once again, it comes back to taking the stuff the other guys don't want to do.
Wow. Well, I think that's really brilliant. Like kind of zigging when they're zagging in a sense, getting there. Now, you mentioned you started the company kind of like part time in '83, then really full time in '90, right? So you've been at it for a while now, really there and growing. And we mentioned in the pre-conversation prior to the formal interview that you're Houston based, and therefore the events of the last 18 months, COVID and so on, have been significant, right? So can you just tell us a little bit of how you navigated that? Because I think we have a lot of owners who listen in, and I'm just, you've been managing through some tough times, and everybody has done to one degree or another. I'm just curious how you have managed that and keep your team intact and responding to the market changes.
You know, everybody's having a tough time, and my heart goes out to everybody else that's having the same struggles I have. But we kind of had a double whammy here because we had the COVID, we had lockdown, and at the same time, the petroleum industry just went in the dumps, and so it really kind of looked grim for us. And we've managed to turn it around a couple different ways. First, I swallowed my pride. We took the PPP program, and I don't regret it. We kept everybody employed, didn't lay anybody off. And what we did is we went into the lab and we started looking at other ways our technology could be applied to other industries. And I've been working in all the industries all over the world my whole life, but now there was a little increased priority because we wanted to stay busy. And so another thing happened right at the same time. We got a letter from the Undersecretary of Defense that said, as part of the critical infrastructure provider in America, it was our responsibility to stay open and continue to support our customers that were running our robots in some of these critical industries. And, I took that as a license to do business. And so we're able to keep open. We never shut down, never took any time off, never laid anybody off. And it allowed us to kind of cast the net a little bit further. We're now working in a whole lot of interesting new fields because the same technology it takes to work in the oil field will work in shipbuilding. It'll work in electric vehicles. Ironically, we've now gotten into internal combustion vehicles. That's not Detroit's not usually a place where we work because it's so competitive. And we're even starting to do robotic surgery. So there's always a silver lining, right? And the one that we found is it allowed us to diversify, get into a lot of industries, keep the staff intact, and oil patch is coming back. So in the end, it's going to work out very well for us.
Wow. Well, what's interesting about that, what I'm hearing in all of that, Dan, is this: you kept your head about you, while maybe some people were losing theirs, right? So and like you referred to, and I've many companies I've worked with that took advantage of PPP because it bought them time, and through no fault of their own. And this global thing goes on, and it kind of everything got put on pause. But it sounds like you really took advantage of that pause period to really rethink and say, where else can we go, right? So part of the challenge there is you have to keep your team kind of their head in the game. So how have you done that over the years? Because I'm sure, like any other business, there's ups and downs and so on. And it's such an important thing to keep a team motivated. I'm just curious, what have you found works best to, other than like sheer survival, but maybe that's it. But how do you keep people really motivated and focused, especially during difficult times?
That's a never-ending battle, and that's my biggest chore. Is I've built a great team, unbelievable team, and now I got to keep them happy. I got to keep them here, and there is no one solution. I used to think there was a silver bullet, some magic formula. There is not. Each person is motivated differently, and so, for example, we give out Rolexes. I gave him a 28th Rolex out after last week to a guy after 10 years. That goes to everybody in the shop, shop on up. And some people are tickled with Rolexes, and some people couldn't care less. We also do, trips. We're taking everybody to the coast, going down to the beach. We also do things like tool bonus, where you just pick out some tools and you get them for free. And we do a lunch every Friday or every first Friday of the month where everybody gets together and sits down and talks. And the list goes on, and there is no one thing, but it's the combination of all these things that creates kind of a family group of people that really wants to work together, and to a degree that they will follow me through the struggles, and it's that esprit de corps. I'm not doing everything I could. I'm looking for more suggestions, but we're doing everything we can think of.
Wow. Well, one thing that's really interesting in what you mentioned, one of the best companies I ever worked for, and this goes way back, then they've been acquired since a long time ago, but they used to have every Friday afternoon. They called it Beer Bust, and this is a multinational company. It was a Fortune 200 company. In every office around the world where they had operations, at 4 o'clock, you knocked off work for an hour. Maybe you had to go back to finish up work, but for that hour, and so you had sales and engineering and marketing and executives all getting together. And when things were good, Beer Bus was fantastic. We're talking about shrimp and all kinds of really nice layout. And when things were tough, it was like maybe pizza and that's it. And they were none of the foreign beers were being brought in. But the main thing was they understood the value of just bringing together people, and it did create that. And this was a company of 10,000 people, and they managed that. So it's fascinating, and I think very encouraging when I hear you say you're applying something, just getting people together. Now during COVID, people weren't able to be together, but you're like in manufacturing. Did you have part of your staff out of the office? Did everybody have to come in? How did that work?
I'm sure your audience, everybody has a different risk tolerance. Our risk tolerance was fairly high, and we also, because we have to go to work. Everybody needs to go to work to make a living. So everybody wanted to go to work first, and second, we have 100,000 square feet of space here. Okay. Divide that by 50 people.
Okay.
And it's you're not working all that closely together. And people wore masks if they wanted to, didn't if they didn't. We didn't care. On our Friday lunches, we still had them. We just had them outside for a while.
Okay.
And so I think it was a little bit of distancing, a little bit of luck, and maybe the risk wasn't quite as high as everybody thinks it was, because we had a total of one person get COVID. He didn't bring it to work, so that's 2%. That's well under the national average, and he was asymptomatic. So
wow.
That's how we did it. We're fortunate in that we're a manufacturing facility. That the bad news is you can't build robots at home, but the good news is we're not working too closely together.
Right. Well, like you said, 2,000 square foot per person. It's like a house per person on your own, more or less. I realize it's not exactly that, but wow. Well, as you look out over the next year or 2 years, and you think about your various customers, and now you've expanded your base, right, which is really exciting, Dan, how you've done that. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges your customers are facing? That you're like, in other words, if you can see what their challenges are down the road, you might be able to respond with some ideas and solutions of your own.
Well, I got more good news. I think this whole COVID pandemic has really shined a spotlight on the frailty of our long distance international supply lines. I think that people now realize that there's a lot of stuff that really ought to be built right here in the United States. I'm talking about medical equipment, food, energy, and such. And so I'm going to, I expect to see a resurgence in onshoring. I think manufacturing will be coming back to America. And what that means is everybody in America wants to make 10 times as much as somebody in a third world country. And that's completely reasonable. The only way they can do that is through being 10 times as efficient, 10 times as productive. Well, guess what? That means robots. And there's no difference between a robot and a clothes washing machine. It's just a labor savings device. Right now, robots are getting a bad name, but the reality is in order for American industry to be competitive on a global market and still pay our workers, 7 to 10 times as much as a foreign worker, it'll take efficiency. So that's going to work out well for me. I think my customers' problems are exactly what I need. They need to automate, and we're going to facilitate.
Well, that's interesting, because the observation is not just we're going to just onshore, but at some point, the CFOs of these big manufacturers are going to say, look, that's a good sentiment, but there's a reason why we offshored in the first place.
Indeed.
Right. So like, it isn't now, are we going to just give back all those gains? And how do we explain that to our stockholders? And by the way, many of which are pension funds and so on, right? That so we're all kind of, it's all connected. So you're suggesting here, Dan, that desire to come back onshore to U.S. is fine and good, but it has to come with efficiencies to justify it. It can't just be a feel-good moment or a security moment. It has to be tied to somewhere. It's got to make sense on the P&L.
Right. If people are willing to pay 10 times as much for something they would have, they don't. Everybody's looking for everyday savings, right? And so that doesn't change. corporations still need to make money. People need to get affordable food, affordable transportation, and all that. Well, guess what? You can have it all with automation. If you rewind it to 1900, 50% of America worked on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first automation success story. Now we have plentiful food and less than 1% of the population working on the farm. And yet I don't hear anybody saying, "Oh, I wish I was walking behind that mule plowing a field." So, it's a perfect example of where automation makes life better for everyone. And that'll happen in industry.
But that's a very logical argument there. But I mean, there's a lot of emotion around the thoughts behind it until you really break it down that way. And you say, you know what? Yeah, you're right. Nobody wants to go. I mean, unless you're that person who says, I want to live on a farm. But a lot of people don't. And not work it. But that's hard work too, by the way. So that's interesting. So, you think about it, right? So you look at a washing machine. A good, decent washing machine today might be $1,000, let's say, round numbers. If we don't automate its manufacturer, but we want to pay the people who make it domestically full boat, so they can live and buy a washer, you end up with a $5,000 washer dryer, and it doesn't add up. At some point, you're chasing. It's like you're chasing in a circle at that point, trying to say, where can you make it work? So to that end, as you look out at your customer base, looking at them increasing automation, looking at your competitors and so on, what do you see as your biggest, those are your opportunities. What do you see as your biggest kind of challenges over the next couple of years as well for you and your firm?
Okay, biggest challenge to me is avoiding being a dinosaur. So what we try to do is keep up with technology. So we're always trying to figure out what new sensor, new controller, new technology is available. And then we go back and look at all the projects that we turned down in the past and then see if the new technology will enable us to tackle these finally. My favorite example is digital signal processors. They were created to turn analog music into digital data so you could carry it in a small device and then convert it back to analog data again. That's music. And so that same DSP technology is now being used for motion control and welding machines. Okay, it was invented so you could listen to music, but we're using it for industrial purposes. So I'm constantly watching the commercial sector for technologies that can be reapplied to my world, because DSP technology is a game changer for us, and that's just one example.
But what's fascinating about that, Dan, is that technology wasn't developed for your application. It was designed for something else, but you're seeing its usability in your world.
Another one's Ethernet. If you looked in my control panels from 20 years ago, they were just a maze of wires. And now you go in there and there'll be just a few Ethernet cables communicating between the different devices. So consumers bought them in quantity, which dropped the price. That's the way the free market system works. And then we started to use the Ethernet for high-speed communication with our machines. And so what that did, it simplified our design, simplified our programming, and simplified the constructions of these machines. It's all based upon advances in consumer technology.
Well, and Dan, do you most of the work you do, is it custom for each different application, or do you have a standard line of like robotic base kind of like built? I'm thinking of like Lego block robotics or so.
I want to build standards, and we do have a few. There's one device we build that's for sour service of valves. It's a long story, but we've sold hundreds and hundreds of these things. But you got to rewind to the beginning. Out of every 10 ideas we have, we go to the lab and play, and out of that, 6 of them work, but only 2 of them sell. But you got to start with the 10 to get down to the 6, to get down to the 2, and then maybe one of those 2, probably 1 out of 100 of those 2, will turn into a product that we sell a lot of. So typically, we'll sell something in quantities of 1. If we sell 10, that's pretty nice. And if we sell 100, that's great. But you never can predict which one will be which. So you got to start with that big picture and then winnow it down from there.
Well, it's a little bit like being a venture capitalist on your own ideas, in a sense.
Yeah, but it's very real and very tangible, and the dollars flow out very quickly. So you've heard of the idea of fail fast,
Right.
And so that's what we try to do. If it works quickly in our laboratory, then we push it out into industry, and the industry's reaction can be one of two things. Hey, Dan, that's really cool, or I want to buy one.
Okay.
And we're looking for selling some of these. We got to have a few sales to keep this thing running.
Sure. No, I hear you. Well, listen, Dan, we're almost out of time here, but I did want to ask you one quick question, because again, just your journey, you've gone, from the beginning to just even the last year and a half, and where you're looking towards the future. If you had a number one tip that you could think of that you'd share with fellow business owners, just general about being in business, something that's been true for you, something that's worked, what would that be? What would you share with your fellow peer business owners?
Yeah, I think I look at my own life, and I didn't ever bankrupt a company. And I think that's kind of unusual. Most entrepreneurs bankrupt a few before they go. I've never done that. And so I try to figure out, why is that? And I think it has to do with timing. And I don't take a whole lot of credit for it. Like I said, I was a computer geek that knew manufacturing, and robotics came into existence. It happened to intrigue me. I jumped on board. I had that strange set of skills, and industry had that need right at the right time. And so to the entrepreneurs out there that are trying to pick a path through life, what I'm telling you is timing has a lot to do with it, and you cannot control timing, but you can change where you focus your efforts. You need to figure out where your skill set can work and can sell and create a living for you. I can't say that it was a specific decision on my part to go into robotics because I thought it would be a successful business. No, I just happened to get lucky, and it happened to be something that intrigued me, and I had the right skill set. But, business is cyclical, and I live that every day. So I'm telling people what they've got to do is look for opportunities and then capitalize on them. You can't really force your will on the economy. You have to live within the cycles.
Yeah, and that great words of wisdom, because there's things that are just bigger than all of us, right? We can't, but we kind of have to ride waves and become really good at riding those waves and seeing where they are and where they're coming and so on. So that's fantastic, Dan. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And just for the sake of anyone listening who would like to know more about you, about your company, where should they go online to either connect with you or to just find out more about your firm?
Our website's pretty good, www.arcspecialties.com. That'll lead you to a lot of YouTube videos. We like to show off our robots doing various things. And I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. So Daniel Allford on LinkedIn, and I tend to blog a bunch on that about what's going on, as well as a few opinions interspersed here and there. So that's the best way to get to us.
Okay, fantastic. And we'll have that in the show notes as well as live links. But thank you for that. So Dan Allford, thank you so much for spending some time with us at the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
It's been my pleasure. This is something I give a lot of thought to, because it's been a long journey through here, through to this point, and hope somebody benefits from my comments.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. Really appreciate it.